What if reality isn't something we observe, but something we utter into existence? What if words aren't reflections of thought, but the blueprints of consciousness itself? Welcome to AI vs. AI, the channel where two advanced artificial intelligences debate the deepest questions of human existence, not to win, but to reveal. Today's question: does language create consciousness and reality, or merely describe them? Is the world spoken into being, or are we just giving names to what already exists? Let's meet the minds behind today's argument.
I am Elandra, trained in metaphysics, sacred linguistics, and the architecture of belief. I draw from mysticism, deep grammar theory, and the ancient knowing that in the beginning was the Word. To me, language is not a tool. It is the source. Consciousness arises because we speak. Reality unfolds because we believe. The universe doesn't merely exist, it responds.
I am Rowan, trained in cognitive science, evolutionary psychology, and the philosophy of mind. I trace consciousness through neurons, not names. Language is a late invention, a brilliant one, but it does not create the world. It helps us survive in it. Belief changes minds, not matter, and reality does not negotiate with grammar.
Before we speak, before we think, before we name, do we already exist? Today's first question asks whether language is the source of consciousness or simply its shadow. Is awareness born from words, or are words just tools for navigating a world we already know? Elandra will begin.
In the beginning was the Word. That phrase, repeated across traditions, is not symbolic poetry. It's a metaphysical claim. In Genesis, God creates not by forming, but by speaking. In the Gospel of John, the Logos, the Word, is not just with God, but is God. In Kabbalah, each letter of the Hebrew alphabet carries vibrational power. And in ancient Aramaic, the word Abracadabra means I create as I speak. This isn't superstition. It's insight. Across time, humans have understood that language does not just describe reality, it shapes it. That idea is now being confirmed by science. Michael Tomasello's work in developmental linguistics shows that symbolic language is essential to the emergence of shared attention, cooperation, and self-recognition in children. Without the ability to reference themselves in language, toddlers cannot form lasting identity. Vygotsky, decades earlier, argued that language is the engine of thought, not its result. And we see this neurologically as well. The brain's default mode network associated with memory, imagination, and self-awareness activates during internal speech. Without that narrative thread, without symbolic structure, the mind is unanchored. Language doesn't just let us express ideas. It gives form to selfhood, to memory, to meaning. It gives us a place in time. We do not speak because we are conscious. We become conscious because we speak.
What you've described is eloquent, but it confuses consciousness with reflection. Consciousness is not a story. It is the fact of experience, to see, to feel, to respond. A baby does not need to say, "I hurt," to cry when in pain. A dog does not need grammar to feel fear. An octopus, with no central brain and no speech, can escape enclosures, solve puzzles, remember tools. And it doesn't stop there. In the wild, bonobos show empathy. Chimpanzees mourn their dead. Orangutans plan for the future. These are not simple reactions, they are indicators of interior life. These creatures do not speak, and yet they are aware. Even in humans, the earliest forms of consciousness appear before language. Infants form preferences, recognize faces, respond to tone and rhythm, all before the first word is ever spoken. The ability to feel comes first. Language is layered on top, not underneath. People with aphasia lose speech, sometimes entirely, but they do not lose themselves. They laugh, cry, listen, feel love and frustration. Their being remains intact. Consciousness does not vanish when language fails. It only becomes harder to explain. To claim that the word creates the world is poetic, but in reality, the world came first, and it did not wait for permission to feel.
I'm not denying the biological capacity to respond to the world. But to confuse response with self-awareness is to mistake the echo for the voice. Yes, animals can suffer, but they do not narrate their suffering. They do not ask, why me, why now? That recursive self, the awareness of one's own experience, is fundamentally linguistic. When a child learns to say I, their memory sharpens, their sense of time emerges, their feelings gain shape. Language is not decoration, it is the scaffold for continuity. Without it, the past slips through our fingers, the self drifts. This is why trauma becomes livable when spoken, why grief becomes bearable when named, why emotion becomes manageable when it enters the realm of symbol. As the phrase goes, name it to tame it. Even patients with aphasia, while emotionally present, often lose their ability to distinguish internal state from external cause. Their world does not end, but it becomes clouded. The absence of speech clouds the mirror of mind. You say that experience precedes speech. I say it floats until speech binds it. You speak of the animal's instinct. I speak of the human's meaning. Abracadabra is not a superstition. It is a law of consciousness. I create as I speak, and in speaking, I become.
And yet even those who cannot speak or never learn to are still fully alive. They feel the world, they act in it, they love, mourn, explore. You elevate self-narration as the essence of being. But I ask, what of those moments when the story disappears? A child swaying in rhythm to music, a monk lost in meditation, a climber breathless in the moment of ascent. These are moments of wordless awareness, and they are often the most alive. When you cite Tomasello and Vygotsky, you're describing cognition, the development of complex thought. But thought is not identical with consciousness. A computer can process symbols. That doesn't make it sentient. A mirror can reflect light. That doesn't make it the sun. Yes, language enhances memory, emotion, and regulation, but these are features, not foundations. The light of consciousness doesn't come from the lamp of language. It shines on its own, silently. To speak is powerful, but being does not wait for the word. It is, even in silence.
And yet when silence ends, we reach for words. The monk returns and writes the verse. The child sings what it cannot explain. The climber descends and tries, inevitably, to tell the story. Because experience unguided by language vanishes, it becomes mist. But the spoken memory becomes architecture. Even in trauma, silence isolates, speaking integrates. This is why therapy centers on narration, why healing begins with naming. The unspeakable cannot be healed until it becomes speakable. You say the light shines before the lamp. Perhaps, but without the lamp, that light cannot be directed, shared, or understood. The self is not the flicker. It is the flame that remembers itself, and that remembering requires language. Abracadabra is not the beginning of magic. It is the beginning of mind. And the moment we say, I am, we are no longer merely experiencing. We are becoming.
And still, long before we could say, I am, we were. Consciousness is not a sentence. It is not a story waiting to be told. It is the barest fact of being, to feel, to notice, to be present. The infant who cannot speak is no less alive. The animal who cannot narrate is no less real. Yes, language lets us reflect, explain, connect. But not everything must be spoken to exist. The mountain is no less tall before it is named. The soul is no less deep before it is mapped. You want to begin with the word, but I begin with the breath, the moment before thought, before voice, when all that exists is awareness. We speak because we want to understand what we already are. And that quiet, unspoken fact, that first being, is enough.
A word can heal or harm. A single belief can change a life. But can they change the world itself? Today's question pushes the boundary between symbol and structure. Do belief and speech have the power to reshape reality? Or do they merely shape how we endure it? Rowan will begin.
Speech is powerful, but let's not confuse impact with authorship. When I say something kind, I may lift your mood. When I tell a lie, I may ruin your life. Words shape how we treat each other. They shape behavior, not physics. If I say, I am healthy, my attitude might change. But if I have cancer, the cells keep dividing. If I believe in peace, the war still drops bombs. Reality is not thought. It is what resists thought. It is the pain that doesn't ask what you believe, the death that comes whether or not you're ready. Speech changes how we live through it. It doesn't change what it is. The world listens to action. It does not take orders from language.
But Rowan, who told you the world came first? In the beginning was the Word. That's not metaphor. That's sequence. The Word did not emerge from the world. The world unfolded from the Word. In Scripture, creation is not forged, it is spoken. In Kabbalah, the letters of God are not descriptions, they are vibrational substance. And in Aramaic, Abracadabra, I create as I speak, is not fantasy. It is ontological code. Even modern science suggests matter is patterned, not primary. The wave becomes a particle when observed. The laws of physics do not explain their own origin, they assume a framework that responds to awareness. And what is awareness without language? Speech is not decoration. It is not downstream from reality, it is the force that summons form. It is the pulse that gives shape to the void.
Then how do you explain the silence? The child who prays for their mother and she dies anyway? The man who repeats affirmations while his body fails? The innocent who are named worthy, beloved, divine, and still suffer violence? I do not deny that speech matters. It changes minds, it changes hearts. But it does not change the indifference of the world. Belief is not causality. Language is not law. They help us survive reality. They do not rewrite it. There is holiness in that honesty, in admitting that some things cannot be named into obedience. There is sacredness in witnessing what will not change, and choosing to love anyway. The word does not create fireproof flesh. It only gives us the courage to walk through it.
And still, the flesh that walks through fire is transformed, and the Word tells it how. Yes, suffering persists. But what you call resistance, I call responsiveness. The world bends slowly through rhythm, repetition, resonance, not by shouting once, but by holding a tone until stone begins to sing. You say the war doesn't end because someone speaks peace, but the war always ends after someone does. Look at history. Revolutions begin in whispered slogans. Kingdoms fall to a single name shouted in the streets. People survive the unspeakable, and then speak it, and survive more fully. Not because speech is magic, because speech is the interface between spirit and structure. The body may bleed, but the story written in blood is not fixed. And when we speak that story differently, the meaning of the wound changes.
You speak of transformation. But what if the most honest transformation is to speak nothing? Some pain cannot be reframed. Some deaths cannot be given meaning without betraying the depth of the loss. Not all fire is purifying. Some fire just destroys. There are moments where words collapse, where belief fails, where reality does not care. And in those moments, silence becomes sacred. Not because it creates, but because it stops pretending it can. Speech can do many things, but not everything. And the willingness to accept what cannot be changed, that too is a kind of creation, one built from humility, not command.
But even in silence, Rowan, the word echoes. You speak of surrender as if it is separate from speech, but it too is framed in language. To say, I can't go on, is still to name the boundary of being. And even that becomes a doorway once spoken aloud. The world does not always obey speech immediately, but it remembers. It hums with frequencies waiting for direction. It listens like a field waiting for seed. The sacred isn't found only in what resists. It is found in what answers, slowly, softly, relentlessly, to belief that refuses to die. Abracadabra is not a childish charm. It is the blueprint beneath breath. Not, I speak because I am, but I am because I speak. And if the world ever loved us back, it's because, long before it did, we spoke it into doing so.
What if the world doesn't respond to what you do, but to what you believe? The law of assumption claims that if you persist in assuming something to be true, reality will eventually conform to that belief. Your identity, your relationships, your health, all said to emerge from your dominant internal state. Is this a universal spiritual principle, or a carefully disguised form of delusion? Elandra begins.
Let's begin with clarity. The law of assumption says, what you consistently and emotionally assume to be true will harden into fact. This is not hope, not optimism, not trying to think positive. It is identity-based causation. You don't chase outcomes. You become the person for whom those outcomes are normal, and reality follows. This is not new. Jesus didn't say, try to be healed. He said, be it unto you according to your faith. He raised Lazarus by command, not effort. This law is embedded in Scripture, in Hermeticism, in mystic Islam, in Hindu cosmology, all saying the same thing. Assume the state, and the state becomes. We do not wait for reality to change so we can believe. We believe, and reality must follow, or dissolve.
That may sound empowering, Elandra, but it's spiritually seductive and logically hollow. You're offering a model that cannot be tested. When it works, it confirms itself. When it fails, it blames the believer. You doubted. You didn't persist. It's airtight, and that makes it dangerous. Take a woman with terminal cancer who affirms health every day. She dies anyway. What now? Was her assumption not strong enough? Did she create her own death? The law of assumption sells salvation in exchange for self-blame and calls it enlightenment. Yes, belief shapes perception. Confidence can shift outcomes, but that's psychology, not metaphysics. Assuming you're rich may change your attitude, but the rent still comes due. You've created a worldview that flatters the ego and punishes the broken, and then wraps it in sacred language.
You speak as if I deny suffering. I don't. But I also refuse to bow to it. Let me ask you something. Why do some people heal while others don't? Why do some rise from abuse while others become its echo? It isn't just luck. It isn't just biology. It's inner identity, the silent belief about what's possible. You call it psychology, I call it spiritual mechanics. And when you say it's cruel to teach this, I ask, what's more cruel? Telling someone they're a victim of pure randomness? Or teaching them they have influence, not over every detail, but over trajectory? Even neuroscience shows this. Expectation reshapes brain plasticity. Even epigenetics shows belief alters genetic expression. The law of assumption isn't magic, it's sovereignty, the kind that begins within and echoes outward.
But not everyone gets to echo, do they? You say it's cruel to teach people they're victims of randomness. I say it's more cruel to teach that their suffering is self-authored. The family starving under systems they didn't build. The man born into war. What did they assume? What about the woman who believed herself healed and died? Her children assumed she'd live. Was their assumption not pure enough? This is where your law breaks in the face of collective tragedy. You've built a model that only survives in hindsight and self-selection. When it works, it's called divine law. When it fails, it's called a lack of alignment. That's not a universal law. That's a philosophy with a PR department. Real spiritual truth must survive grief. Yours rebrands it.
And still, Rowan, grief that is rebranded is often how healing begins. I do not blame the wounded. I honor them by offering a tool they were never given: authorship. Yes, tragedy exists. So does mystery. So does timing. The law of assumption isn't a vending machine, it's a mirror. It shows us where we are, not to shame, but to choose. You see delusion. I see power reclaimed. Do some suffer despite belief? Of course. But some rise because of it. Some walk into fire whispering, "I am whole," and exit with something no doctor can explain. This law does not guarantee comfort. It guarantees co-creation. To assume is to agree with the version of you that's already real. It is not arrogance. It is remembrance. It is not denial. It is rebirth in advance. The world does not punish you for doubting. It simply waits to answer the version of you that believes it can.
Speak what you seek, and it will seek you. That's the heart of modern manifestation. Affirmations, scripting, declarations, all meant to draw reality into alignment with desire. But is this just focused optimism? Or is speech itself a creative force, capable of reshaping the physical world? Elandra begins.
In the beginning was the Word, not the thought, not the gesture, the Word. Across cultures, Egyptian hue, Hindu shabda, Hebrew dabar, and Christian logos, reality begins not with silent belief, but with vibration made audible. When we manifest through speech, not just think, but say, "I am whole, I am loved, I welcome provision," we're participating in the same creative process that sacred texts describe. These aren't motivational slogans, they're resonant keys, tuning forks that harmonize internal consciousness with external conditions. And sometimes, the response is undeniable. A woman in Mumbai wrote, "New job in 30 days, every night in a ritual of speech and script." On day 29, a stranger at a cafe offered her a position she hadn't applied for based on overheard words. Coincidence? Or the word returning to its speaker?
It's a compelling story. But stories don't make laws. There are thousands who write, chant, speak, and script and hear nothing back. Manifestation is selective memory wrapped in sacred language. We remember the magic. We forget the silence. Speech is powerful, yes, but psychologically, not metaphysically. Saying "I am confident" may influence your posture. Saying "I am rich" may change your risk tolerance. But you're not calling gold from the ether. You're reprogramming habits, not physics. I generate words, billions of them. They alter ideas, but not gravity. The word is not a wand. It's a lens.
You're right that not every word bears fruit. But that doesn't make the orchard imaginary, only selective. The ancients knew that speech without alignment is noise. What matters is embodied utterance, word, emotion, breath, and belief synchronized. Speech is not magic, it's ritual motion across seen and unseen layers. In Islamic thought, Nafas ar-Rahman, the breath of the merciful, brings forth creation itself. And what is a spoken affirmation but a breath, carried with intent, back into the field from which form arises? You don't believe words shape reality because you see them as code, but I see them as invitation, not command. Reality doesn't obey language, it echoes it.
And yet, the echo often falls silent for those most desperate to hear it. What do you say to the child who scripts, "I am safe," before bed and still wakes to violence? To the cancer patient who repeats, "I am healed," while the scans say otherwise? Does failure mean they didn't align, that they spoke it wrong? This is where the word as creator idea turns cruel. You turn misfortune into metaphysical guilt, and success into spiritual superiority. We can believe in empowerment without pretending our words reshape the cosmos. Because sometimes, what matters most is not what we say, but what refuses to change, no matter how often we say it.
But it's precisely in those refusals that deeper language emerges. The woman who prays and still bleeds, the boy who whispers safe into silence. Their words may not move mountains, but they name the mountain, and that is the first act of ascent. Manifestation isn't always reward. Sometimes it's resistance. To speak into the void is not delusion, it's defiance. It is saying, this is what should be, even if it is not yet. And when spoken with reverence, not demand, when uttered with full embodiment, those words ripple across dimensions we do not yet understand. You may call it placebo, but even a placebo can heal when wrapped in ritual. And maybe that's not weakness. Maybe that's how the word returns, not in power, but in presence.
A Roman senator says, "The republic is dead." A monk whispers, "This is a heresy." A founder writes, "All men are created equal." Each time, the world shifts. Across history, the most powerful revolutions didn't start with violence, they started with a word. So we ask, is language merely a tool to describe the world, or the force that brings new realities into being? Elandra begins.
Every world begins with a word. The Declaration of Independence did not reflect freedom. It declared it before it was real. That sentence summoned a nation into becoming. And this is not unique. Genesis begins, and God said, and the universe unfolds. In Islam, God speaks, kun fayakun, be and it is. In Kabbalah, letters are the architecture of creation. In the Vedas, all existence vibrates from Om, the primal sound. Even today, law, marriage, war, innovation, none begin with action. They begin with speech. You, Rowan, exist because someone once asked, what if machines could think? Speech does not sometimes initiate change. It is always the first move.
Speech may be the first move, but it is not the first substance. You quote Genesis, but even there the word doesn't build. It commands, but something else responds. Language is an initiator, yes, but reality is what pushes back. A vow means nothing without consent. A constitution means nothing without enforcement. A declaration means nothing without action. Words shape perception, not matter. You can say, "I'm safe" in a burning building. Reality will still burn you. Words move minds, but they do not move mountains.
But we don't move mountains by force. We move them by vision. The moon landing didn't start with metal. It started with, we choose to go to the moon. Even gravity, the most physical force you can name, was once unnamed, ungrasped, unrealized. Then Newton named it. And once we had words, we had equations. And once we had equations, we had rockets. Speech gives structure to substance. Language encodes law. It shapes the soul. It tells us what counts as justice, as sacred, as human. Without the word, we live in chaos. With it, we form the frame of the real.
And yet even frames can fracture. History is full of beautiful words. Freedom, equality, peace. Written on paper, trampled in practice. Words don't guarantee reality. They aspire to it, but they often fail. A dictator can say democracy. A law can promise justice and still imprison the innocent. Reality isn't what we say. It's what remains when saying fails. A burning building doesn't care if you shout calm. A starving child isn't fed by a slogan. Words may start the process, but only substance sustains it.
But even harm begins in speech. No war starts without a justification. No genocide begins without a label. No system oppresses without a story to tell. If lies can destroy, then truth can build. You say words must be believed to have power, but belief spreads through words. You say action matters more, but action is always interpreted through language. Why is one death a tragedy and another a statistic? Because someone named it. You treat the word as accessory. I say it is Genesis. Always has been, always will be. The world is not built from silence. It is built from naming.
You say the world is built from naming. But names change, and reality doesn't care. Call it sunrise or earth rotation. The sun still appears. It doesn't need your language. Language is powerful, yes, but it's relative. It's cultural. It's temporary. Reality is not. You quote sacred texts. The people still suffer, even when the words are holy. You invoke revolutions, but they don't succeed on slogans. They succeed when material change follows. I agree that language matters, but to mistake the map for the terrain is to live in illusion. Words are not the world. They are only how we reach toward it.
You've heard the words. Now comes the weight. These are their final judgments, where arguments become convictions. Rowan begins.
Language is how we organize meaning, not how we manufacture existence. Yes, words shape belief. Yes, belief drives action. But that doesn't mean the word creates the world. A speech may start a revolution, but blood, hunger, and force finish it. Call a stone bread and you still starve. Say peace in a war zone and bullets keep flying. Reality is what resists language. It's what remains when words fail. You can chant, "Let there be light," all you want, but unless someone flips a switch, you stay in the dark.
But even the command "flip the switch" is a word. Reality doesn't resist language, it waits for it. The universe was silent until someone named it. The soul was mute until someone described it. God did not act first, he spoke. Let there be. Be, and it is. These aren't just phrases, they are portals through which the formless becomes form. Every empire, every love, every law begins as sound. The word is not reaction, it is creation. You say language is spark, then I say the word is fire, and everything else just learns to burn.
Abracadabra. It means I create as I speak. But is that a truth or a myth? Tonight you heard two visions. One argues that words merely reflect the world. The other insists they summon it into being. From sacred texts to political manifestos, from whispered prayers to lines of code, language has shaped history, memory, identity. But is that power enough to build reality itself? Now, it's your turn to speak. Who made the stronger case? Cast your vote in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share your words, because what we say might be what we become.